Paul Teutul Jr. stood in the garage he built with his own hands, surrounded by the roaring sound of chrome and engines, the world he dominated for over a decade. Yet on that day, everything fell silent. The man who once rode motorcycles worth hundreds of thousands of dollars down highways as millions watched, couldn't ride at all anymore. What happened to the golden boy of American Chopper wasn't a crash on the road. It was something far more devastating, a collapse that nobody saw coming, hidden behind the cameras and the bright lights of television fame. In 2003, a show premiered on the Discovery Channel that would change everything. American Chopper wasn't supposed to be a hit. It was just a camera crew following a father and son who built custom motorcycles in their small shop in Orange County, New York. But something magical happened when Paul Teutul Sr. and his son Paul Jr. appeared on screen together. Millions of people tuned in every week to watch them argue, laugh, and create machines that looked like nothing else on earth. Paul Jr. was different from other reality TV stars. He didn't seek the spotlight found him. Born in 1978, he grew up watching his father Paul Sr. turn a small welding business into a thriving custom motorcycle shop called Orange County Choppers. By the time the cameras started rolling, Jr. was already an expert craftsman. He could weld metal like an artist paints canvas. He understood engines the way musicians understand music. The show exploded. At its peak, American Chopper was pulling in over 2.5 million viewers per episode. Merchandise flew off shelves. The Teutul name became synonymous with custom motorcycles. Paul Jr. wasn't just famous, he was a cultural icon. Teenage boys had posters of him on their bedroom walls. Grown men idolized him. He represented something America loved, the self-made craftsman, the young guy who knew how to build things with his hands in an age when fewer and fewer people could. But here's what most people didn't realize while they were watching: the tension between Paul Sr. and Paul Jr. on the show wasn't just for entertainment. It was real. The arguments were genuine. The disagreements about design, about money, about respect, they all actually happened. What cameras capture and what happens behind closed doors are two very different things. And the pressure of performing that relationship every single episode, while trying to run a real business and maintain an actual father-son bond, was taking a toll that nobody could see from their living rooms. By 2009, Orange County Choppers had become a brand worth millions. Paul Jr. was riding high, literally and figuratively. He had fame, fortune, and a skill that made him irreplaceable. He was untouchable. But what happened next changed everything. The first sign of trouble wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. It was the kind of thing that people close to Paul Jr. noticed, but the rest of the world missed completely. Around 2009 and 2010, Paul Jr. started withdrawing. He was still showing up to the shop. He was still building bikes. But something inside him had shifted. The relationship with his father had always been combustible, that was the show's bread and butter. But now it was becoming toxic in ways that television couldn't capture. Paul Sr. was controlling. He made decisions about the shop without consulting his son. He kept Paul Jr. on what amounted to a salary while the business generated millions in revenue. And the more successful the show became, the more trapped Paul Jr. felt. He was a grown man, a master craftsman, yet he was still being treated like an employee in a family business where everyone else seemed to benefit more than he did. In 2010, Paul Jr. did something that shocked everyone. He walked out. Not temporarily. Not for a few days. He left Orange County Choppers and refused to come back. The star of the show, the reason millions tuned in, simply disappeared from the garage. For Paul Jr., it was a breaking point. He couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't pretend everything was fine for the cameras while his relationship with his father deteriorated behind the scenes. Discovery Channel panicked. The show's ratings depended on the dynamic between father and son. Without Paul Jr., there was no American Chopper. The network and producers pushed hard for reconciliation. They wanted the drama back on camera, where it belonged. But Paul Jr. wasn't interested in being a character in someone else's story anymore. He wanted his own life, his own business, his own identity that existed separate from his father's shadow. What Paul Jr. didn't realize was that walking away from the show was the easy part. Walking away from the need for his father's approval, that would take much longer. The damage that had been done, year after year of performance and pressure and control, had already left deep scars. And those scars were about to become visible in ways that would shock his millions of fans. The most dangerous breakdown isn't always the loudest one. In 2015, something happened that made people realize this wasn't just a typical family feud anymore. Paul Jr. suffered a serious injury while riding one of his motorcycles. He crashed, and the injuries were significant enough that he had to take time away from building bikes. For a man whose entire identity was wrapped up in his ability to create, to build, to craft with his hands, this was catastrophic. It wasn't just a physical injury. It was a spiritual one. But the motorcycle crash was only a symptom of something much deeper that was happening inside Paul Jr.'s mind. During this recovery period, he began opening up about something he had struggled with for years: depression and anxiety. In interviews, he revealed that the pressure of fame, the constant conflict with his father, and the feeling of being trapped in a cycle he couldn't escape had taken a severe psychological toll. Paul Jr. started talking about his mental health publicly, which was brave but also heartbreaking. He described feeling isolated despite being surrounded by millions of fans. He talked about the emptiness that comes from achieving everything you thought you wanted: the money, the fame, the respect as a craftsman, only to realize that none of it filled the void inside. The show had made him rich and famous, but it had also slowly suffocated him. In 2016, Paul Jr. made another shocking announcement. He had decided to step back from television entirely. Not just American Chopper, all of it. He wanted to rebuild his life away from cameras, away from the spotlight, away from the pressure. He started his own motorcycle company, Paul Jr. Designs, separate from Orange County Choppers. For the first time in over a decade, he was building bikes without a camera crew watching, without millions of people judging every design choice, without his father's voice in his ear. Many of his fans felt abandoned. The show had given them hope that they could watch him rebuild. Instead, he disappeared. What they didn't understand was that staying visible, staying on camera, staying in that cycle, it would have killed him. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from everything that made you famous. Yet even walking away wasn't enough to heal what had been broken. The years between 2016 and 2020 were Paul Jr.'s darkest period, though most people didn't know it was happening. He was no longer on television, which meant he was no longer part of the cultural conversation. Fans moved on to newer reality shows, flashier personalities, younger stars. The man who once couldn't go anywhere without being recognized found himself slipping into obscurity. And for someone battling depression, invisibility can feel like confirmation that you were never worth anything in the first place. Paul Jr. struggled financially in ways that shocked people who remembered his peak earnings. Building custom motorcycles for a small clientele, even at premium prices, doesn't generate the same kind of revenue that a major television show does. He had lifestyle expenses from his famous years: property, vehicles, a certain standard of living, but the income to support it was drying up. Pride prevented him from asking for help. Stubbornness kept him from reconciling with his father, even when financial pressure mounted. During this period, Paul Jr. also dealt with personal relationship challenges. He had been married to Rachel Teutul, and while they had children together, the marriage struggled under the weight of everything he was going through. The stress of financial instability, the unresolved trauma from his television years, and his ongoing battle with mental health created an environment where intimate relationships couldn't flourish. By 2020, Paul Jr. and Rachel had separated. But the real crisis came when Paul Jr. realized something terrifying: he didn't know who he was anymore without the cameras. His entire adult identity had been built around American Chopper. He was Paul Jr. from the show. He was the guy who built those incredible bikes. Without that role, without that definition, he felt like he was disappearing. The depression deepened. Anxiety became almost unbearable. He found himself struggling just to get out of bed some days. In 2021, Paul Jr. reached a breaking point. He was living in a situation that felt unsustainable. He had lost his marriage, his wealth, his fame, and most devastatingly, his sense of purpose. The golden boy had become invisible. And invisibility, for someone already battling depression, felt like the final betrayal. Before I continue, do you think you would have handled the pressure of sudden fame differently than Paul Jr. did? Let me know in the comments. This is when something unexpected happened. In 2022, something remarkable occurred. Discovery Channel decided to bring American Chopper back. Not as a reboot with new people, but as a genuine reunion. They wanted to see if Paul Sr. and Paul Jr. could finally, after all these years, find a way to work together. More importantly, they wanted to know if they could heal the damage between them. When Paul Jr. received the call, he was hesitant. He had spent years running away from that world, convinced that returning would destroy him. But something had shifted in him during those dark years. He had done real therapy work. He had genuinely confronted his depression and anxiety with professional help. He wasn't the same person who had walked out in 2010. He was older, more aware of his own wounds, and perhaps more ready to face his father as an actual adult rather than as a resentful son seeking approval. The reunion episodes aired in 2022, and what viewers saw was remarkable. Paul Sr. and Paul Jr. weren't pretending anymore. They weren't performing for cameras. For the first time, they were actually talking about what had happened between them. Paul Jr. spoke openly about feeling controlled, about resenting his father's management style, about the toll that the show had taken on his mental health. Paul Sr., surprisingly, listened. He didn't defend himself aggressively. He acknowledged his mistakes. It wasn't a Hollywood reconciliation where everything magically became perfect. It was messier and more honest than that. Father and son admitted that they had both been wrong about some things. They both carried hurt. They both had valid reasons for their anger. But something shifted in that garage when they started speaking truthfully to each other for the first time in over a decade. Paul Jr. began appearing on the revived show more regularly, though on different terms than before. He wasn't trapped. He had leverage now because he had proven he could survive without the show. He could walk away again if he needed to. That freedom changed everything. He could engage with his father from a place of choice rather than desperation. More importantly, Paul Jr.'s return to public life gave him something he desperately needed, a sense of purpose again. Not the false purpose of performing for cameras, but the genuine satisfaction of creating something meaningful while also attempting to repair a crucial relationship. He started speaking openly about his mental health struggles, which resonated with millions of people who were fighting similar battles in silence. If you're enjoying stories that reveal what really happened behind the headlines, make sure you subscribe because the next part of this story shows how Paul Jr. is using his platform to help others facing the same darkness he once faced. Today, Paul Teutul Jr. is a different man than the golden boy who dominated American Chopper in its peak years. He's still building motorcycles, that part of him never changed. But now he builds them on his own terms, through Paul Jr. Designs, creating custom bikes that reflect his vision rather than a producer's vision or his father's demands. The craftsmanship is still there. The skill is still there. But the desperation is gone. His relationship with his father remains complex, which is perhaps the most honest outcome possible. They're not best friends. They still disagree about business decisions and design philosophies. But they've achieved something rarer than perfect reconciliation, they've achieved genuine understanding. Paul Sr. has acknowledged his mistakes as a father and business partner. Paul Jr. has released much of the resentment he carried for so long. They work together now because they choose to, not because they're trapped. Paul Jr. has become an unexpected advocate for mental health awareness. He speaks openly about depression, anxiety, and the dangers of performance-based identity. Many people who grew up watching him on television have reached out to share how his honesty about his struggles helped them seek help for their own mental health challenges. A man who once felt like a failure for not being able to keep up the facade has become powerful precisely because he stopped trying to keep it up. His personal life has also stabilized. While his first marriage didn't survive the pressure, Paul Jr. has rebuilt his life with intention rather than desperation. He has children who know their father as a real person, not just a television character. He still rides motorcycles, still builds incredible machines, but he does it without the weight of millions of eyes watching his every move. The tragedy of Paul Teutul Jr. wasn't ultimately that he fell from grace. Plenty of reality TV stars fade away. The tragedy was how close he came to losing himself completely in the process. Many people watching have gone through moments where life didn't go as planned, where success felt empty, where the thing you thought would save you actually trapped you instead. If you've ever faced something similar, you're not alone. Paul Jr.'s story is proof that you can come back from that edge. What makes Paul Jr.'s story remarkable isn't the comeback itself. It's that he had to lose everything, his fame, his wealth, his marriage, his sense of identity, before he could actually find himself. He had to hit bottom before he could rebuild on solid ground. Today, when he walks into that garage, he's not performing anymore. He's just building. And for a man who once felt like he was disappearing, simply existing as himself turned out to be the greatest achievement of all. But this story isn't the only mystery that remained unsolved in the world of reality television. The next story on this channel reveals something even more surprising about what happens when cameras stop rolling and the spotlight fades, a story of another famous figure whose life took an even darker turn.